if you look at Trump's travel ban countries, all you have to do is replace Lebanon on the Project for the New American Century list of countries for regime change. You have to replace that with Yemen. And Trump's travel ban list is an exact mirror of the countries being targeted by the Project for the New American Century in September 2000. And then you look what has happened since that document was published. After Afghanistan, justified by we must get bin Laden because the Taliban's there and he's there. There was the invasion of Iraq, completely made up with weapons of mass destruction. Why? It's on the list. They don't have a reason to invade Iraq, so they made one up. Simple as that. And then the two politicians fronting that up, Boy George Bush and Tony Blair, they were replaced at the time of the invasion of Libya by Obama and David Cameron, the British Prime Minister. Now we've got different politicians from different parties to the other two, but it's the same list. Now we're on to Libya on the Project of the New American Century list. And then where did they go next? Into Syria. Says the former French Foreign Minister Roland Dumas said on French television that he was in London talking to British government officials before the trouble started in Syria with the so-called Arab Spring People's Revolution. And these British officials told him, before anything had happened, that they were going to start something in Syria with rebels against Assad. And this is what has happened in relation to America, or this is what's behind it. As they have picked off these countries on this Project for the New American Century list, here is a document headed U.S. Special Forces Unconventional Warfare Strategy, November 30th, 2010. And this isn't the American military process technique for regime changing these countries on that list. This is what it said. Remember, November 2010. The U.S. military's unconventional warfare strategy requires that target state population perceptions are first groomed into accepting an armed insurrection using, quote, propaganda and political and psychological efforts to discredit the government. That's what happened with all these countries that they have been involved in with this Arab Spring. This, they say, will create local and national agitation, helping organize, quote, boycott strikes and other efforts to suggest public discontent before beginning the infiltration of foreign organizers and advisors and foreign propaganda, material, money, weapons, and equipment. Exactly what happened in Libya, exactly what happened in Syria. And it goes on, if retaliation by the target government, in other words, if the government defends itself from your so-called freedom fighter People's Revolution, which you've orchestrated and funded and armed, if there's retaliation from the government to that, the resistance can exploit the negative consequences to garner more sympathy and support from the population by emphasizing the sacrifices and hardship the resistance is enduring on behalf of, quote, the people. This is why nothing was said when these Western armed, funded and trained rebels and mercenaries started attacking the regime of Gaddafi. It was only when Gaddafi responded, it was only when Assad responded that suddenly he's killing his own people. And the whole psychological game was played out exactly as they said. When? November 2010. 1 month later, after this was published, and of course it would have been in the background, organized long before, we had the start of the Arab Spring with the events in Tunisia. And George Soros and his networks are, of course, behind that, if anyone wants to do a modicum of research. So we have these countries on the Project for the New American Century list being picked off quite demonstrably across different administrations, because that force I talked about earlier in the background is in control of whoever's in power. So that agenda plays out through whoever's in power, or officially so. But then you might say, well, there's a problem with this, because Obama did this nuclear deal with Iran, the big prize of these people. And so everything was honky-dory there. And people said to me at the time, well, where's this Iran thing you were talking about? Because, Obama's done this deal and everything seems fine with Iran. Well, let me go back to another document. It's from 2009, and it was published by a think tank connected to all these networks I'm talking about and funded by their sources, called the Brookings Institution. And this was a document published in like I say, 2009. And it was called Which Path to Persia? Options for a New American Strategy Towards Iran. And it said that Iran should be given a, quote, superb offer only to be intentionally revoked in a manner that portrayed Iran as ungrateful. Anyone notice a connection with current events? This is what the document said. Any military operation against Iran will likely be very unpopular around the world and require the proper international context, both to ensure the logistical support the operation would require and to minimize the blowback from it. The best way to minimize international opprobrium, criticism, censure, and maximize support, however grudging or covert, is to strike only when there is a widespread conviction that the Iranians were given, but then rejected, a superb offer, one so good that only a regime determined to acquire nuclear weapons and acquire them for the wrong reasons would turn it down. Under those circumstances, the United States or Israel, it says, could portray its operations as taken in sorrow, not anger, and at least some in the international community would conclude that the Iranians brought it on themselves by refusing a very good deal. Did I mention it was a perception, deception, the whole thing? Exactly what it is, exactly what this is. So this superb offer then was produced and negotiated by Obama and other countries, including the European Union, with Iran. And everything seemed. But when Trump came to power, it was all very different. He said the deal was basically a disaster and bad for him. And when there was a testing by Iran of a ballistic missile recently, which was not in contravention of the deal, they had their excuse. And what did Trump say? Trump said, and so did this Michael Flynn, national security advisor and Iran hater extraordinaire, along with his mate, Mad Dog. They said that Iran had been put on notice, and that Trump said that Iran should have been thankful, here's the wording again, should have been thankful for the nuclear deal. And this is one of his tweets. Yes, the American president communicates with the world on Twitter. This is what Trump said. Iran is playing with fire. They don't appreciate how kind President Obama was to them, not me. Which kind of fits this whole Brookings Institution scenario to put the blame for any conflict upon Iran. And this is how it works in the background, manipulating public perception to accept what the agenda wants. This is why all the propaganda against Gaddafi at the time, all the propaganda against Assad, that's what it's all about. All the propaganda against Saddam Hussein about weapons of mass destruction that could strike British targets in 45 minutes to justify an invasion. It's all a perception deception. And so let's come back to Trump. You have a situation where this man is perceived to be different and outside the system. I mean, don't start me laughing, I'll never stop. And yet what we're seeing is a continuation of the same theme and the same countries being targeted that has passed through Boy Bush, Obama, and to Trump. And, people in the alternative media who have campaigned against certain things and exposed certain things over the years, they really do need to rub their eyes and refocus on what they're now supporting. We have a situation where Goldman Sachs has been given the economic control of the United States. We've had these military people given these what should be civilian posts. We've got Trump talking about torture is justified, demonizing Iran on the way to seeking conflict, and causing chaos. And as I said in last week's video cast, chaos is the currency of these people. They want chaos so that they can offer the order out of the chaos, which is to transform society in the way they want it to change. It's what might be called creative destruction. You destroy the status quo through chaos, whatever that status quo is. You then change the status quo. You then creatively destroy that status quo, and so it goes on. And at each new status quo, the world has changed. There's no two greater examples than the world wars in the 20th century. The First World War vastly changed and creatively destroyed the status quo that had been before. And then the Second World War came along and destroyed the status quo that had followed the First World War. And we're just seeing the continuation of this. And you see, this is the danger. I'm not even saying that Trump is fully aware of what's going on. He probably isn't. But the people around him are. The people in the shadows that control the people around him. And what they have now in the White House is an extreme narcissist with an ego so big and so fragile that he can't let criticism on Twitter go, or criticism by some celebrity go, without having to react to it. This is not what mature, secure people do. And so because of his lack of awareness of the whole political system, he'll have some from his life in business, but I mean really deeply. And because of his narcissistic, egotistical, reactive behavior, the big I am, he is a manipulator's party trick. I mean, if you gave a manipulator a blank sheet of paper and said, describe your ideal person to manipulate, they would draw a picture of Donald Trump. And we need to, those that support Trump need to see this. And those that don't support Trump also need to get informed about how the world really works, instead of just reacting to it in this two-party, left-right manner. We need to take a step back and see the left-right nonsense as just an irrelevance to anything that's going to change anything. Because that left-right us and them structure mentality is what's holding people in this illusion where nothing changes. And if you look at it, it's like an electrical system where both sides need each other. You know, you've got one polarity, the progressives, and then you've got the other polarity, which are basically now the Trump supporters. And they create, by their resistance, they talk about resistance, well, it is an electrical circuit is made between the two, and the electrical circuit goes on doing this and changes nothing, but creates the very upheaval that the hidden hand wants to justify more and more of the police state and the surveillance state. And that's another thing. When you look at Sessions, Trump's, it could be Bush's involved there. When you look at him as Attorney General and his attitudes to human rights and freedoms, what we're also going to see through this Bush, these are Freudian slips, but they're very apt, because I could have said Trump there, I could have said Bush, and I could have said Obama. Tragically, that's how it works.